Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Susanna and today I'll be doing a January reading wrap-up and talking about my February hopefuls. These are the books I read this month. 5 of them I've finished and 3 of them I will continue in February. The first book is Ithaca by Claire North. This is an ancient retelling that tells about the events after the Trojan War, but before Odysseus comes home to Ithaca. So in terms of Homeric epics, it's set after Iliad, but before Odyssey. The book is set on the island of Ithaca, where there is a power vacuum as King Odysseus hasn't yet returned home. A bunch of suitors want to marry his wife Penelope and become the king. And there are also pirates who attack the island. And as if this isn't enough on Penelope's plate, her cousin Clytemnestra, who has killed her husband Agamemnon, escapes to the island and is followed by her children Orestes and Electra, who seek justice for their father. So this book requires prior knowledge of the events of the Trojan War and Greek mythology in general. So like a lot of ancient retellings, this has strong feminist themes and it explores how women can and cannot yield power in a male-dominated world. The story is narrated by Hera, the queen of gods and the goddess of queens. She's a very sassy and snarky narrator who despises people and makes fun of heroes and gods, and poets who sing of heroes and gods. As an omniscient narrator, she knows everyone's thoughts and feelings and everything that has happened and happens and some of the things that will happen, and that is reflected in the narration. The narration switches from third-person omniscient to third-person limited to first-person and occasionally also second-person, and the tense switches from present tense to past tense. This is an interesting literary device, but I found it difficult to connect to any of the characters. There are a lot of complex female characters, but I think their complexity would have shined through clearer if the narrator had been less detached from human experience. For example, I had difficulties understanding Penelope's motives. I started reading this book thinking that it was Penelope's story, but that's not really the case. Penelope doesn't really experience any type of character growth or development. I would rather call this Hera's story, as she is the only character who undergoes any meaningful change. In the beginning of the story, she seems to advocate Clytemnestra's more brass and almost masculine handling of government, but over the course of the book she learns to appreciate Penelope's more quiet and restrained approach. When it comes to the pacing of the book, this is a very slow-paced read. Partly because of the literary style, the narration switches from character to character, so it takes time to orient yourself to the story, but also partly because not a lot happens. For the most part, I really enjoyed this story and I will give it 4 stars. If you enjoy ancient retellings with feminist themes and don't mind a slower pacing, I would recommend this book to you. The second book is The Book Eaters by Sunyi. Hidden across England and Scotland live 6 book eater families. The main character, Devon Fairweather, grows up thinking she's a princess, like the princesses in the fairy tales she eats, but she learns that life doesn't always have a happy ending when her son is born with a different and a darker kind of hunger. He doesn't eat books, he eats minds. This is a gritty, modern fantasy with strong feminist themes. The book eater world is misogynistic and male-dominated, and they treat women as commodities that can be sold from one family to another. Devon is a devoted mother who has lost her daughter and is determined not to let that same happen with her son, and she's ready to do whatever it takes, even letting her son eat the minds of innocent people. The writing in this book is dark and evocative, perfect for the gothic tones of the novel. The book has an intriguing premise, but unfortunately the story doesn't live up to it. I had a hard time connecting with any of the characters, possibly because I don't really care for morally grey characters. The LGBT plus representation in this book was nice, but it unfortunately felt a bit tacked on. There is one character who is asexual and Devon herself is lesbian or bisexual. It's not really clear from the book. She starts a relationship with a woman, but I would have preferred if her realization or self-discovery of her sexual identity had played a larger role in her character development. Now it all felt too rushed. I don't usually mind when books reveal information piecemeal, but for some reason this book had a really annoying way of teasing the reader with information that the reader doesn't yet have. For example, it is mentioned that there are dragons, which sounds very interesting, but later on it is revealed that the dragons aren't real dragons, it's just a nickname for the mind eaters. My biggest problem with this book was there was no real reason why the characters had to be book eaters. The practice of book eating and the feminist themes are not inherently connected. You could have had the exact same story with the characters being vampires. I would have liked to see more connection between the practice of book eating and the book eater culture. If the book eaters' minds are shaped by the books they read, why isn't their culture more modern? It's not like they only ate classics. Related to that, the feminist themes felt sort of outdated and not relevant to a modern day woman. The book eater culture may as well be stuck in the Victorian era. And if this had been a historical fantasy set in the 19th century, I think I would have liked this a lot more. But as it is a modern fantasy, all the mentions of cell phones and video games just dragged me out of the story. Overall, the writing and world building are good, and I would give this 3.5 stars because despite its flaws, I did enjoy reading it. And if you like dark and gritty modern fantasy with morally grey characters, I think you would enjoy this a lot more than I did. The next 3 books I read are ancient Greek tragedies. So, a fun fact. My major in uni was Greek language and literature, and my hobby is collecting ancient Greek and Latin texts. That means that sometimes I end up with multiple translations of the same work. In the past, I read at least one of these translations, but this year my goal is to read all the rest. Most of my ancient books are in Finnish translations because that is my native language. The first of the tragedies is Agamemnon by Aeschylus. This is the first tragedy in his Oresteia trilogy, and it narrates the return of Agamemnon from Troy with Cassandra and their murder by his wife Clytemnestra. This is a morally complex play which features weak male characters and a strong female lead, and it made a nice pair to Claire North's Ithaca. I also read 3 tragedies by Sophocles, 2 translations of his Oedipus Rex and 1 translation of Antigone. Oedipus' story is probably well known to everyone. He has unknowingly murdered his father and married his mother, and in the play he learns the truth. The themes of seeing and blindness are very important in the tragedy. So I read 2 translations. The other one is an older translation which is closer to the Greek text, and it's also closer to the Greek meter of the text, and the newer translation, which is actually not made from ancient Greek, it's a translation from translations. But what is interesting about this play is that it is translated by the actors themselves, so the text in this play is really close to what they would have said on stage. I also read another play by Sophocles, Antigone. Antigone is Oedipus' daughter. Her brothers have killed each other in a battle, and in the play she buries them, defying the order of a tyrant. The conflict between tyrant's hybris and the divine order to bury the dead leads to several tragic deaths in the tragedy. I also started Plato's Republic, but I'm in the middle of it, so more on that on next month's recap. The 2 other books that I'm still in the middle of are Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus and War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Those 3 books I will be continuing in February, so let's move on to my February hopefuls. Yes, this is 11 books. I plan to finish 8 of these. One of the books I will not be finishing in February is War and Peace. I started this in January and I will finish this in March. The 2 modern fiction novels I plan to finish in February are Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus and The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The rest of the books are part of my Ancient Texts project, Plato's Republic, Sophocles' Antigone, Aristotle Poetics, 2 books by Cicero, On Old Age and On Friendship, and The Handbook by Epictetus. 2 books that I plan to start but finish in March are Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and Sophocles, The Complete Plays. This is in English, all the other ancient texts are Finnish translations. Now, if my calculations are correct, and they usually are, I should be able to read these books in February. So tell me about your plans for February. Do you have a TBR or are you a mood reader? I'd love to hear you from the comments, and I'll see you in my next video.